All right, so Avatar: The Last Airbender Book 1, all the fight scenes. Let's look at all of them from every episode and rank them in a tier list. Hey everyone, welcome to the Geek Talk. Today, let's discuss the idea of what is the best fight scenes from Book 1 of Avatar: The Last Airbender. If you haven't seen one of my tier list videos before, I mean, it's pretty commonplace on YouTube nowadays that, people do tier lists. I'm doing a tier list for all the fight scenes. If you don't know me, I have in the past done versus series where I pit some of the Avatar characters together. Aang versus Korra, Toph versus Kuvira. If you want to watch them, they're somewhere around here. But yeah, let's get right into it. Pretty self-explanatory. The categories I have are legendary, awesome, good, meh, bad, and trash. And let's just get right into it. So the first one we have here is Aang versus Zhao. I would put this in probably the good category. I think it was more of a good fight scene in the context of the meaning behind it and the lesson behind it, especially the idea that Zhao was not a true firebender, that he didn't have respect for fire, and that's the reason why he destroyed all of his military vessels, even though Aang didn't lift a finger. So I think on that front, it's a good fight on the story standpoint, but in terms of the actual choreography and what was going on, not something I think about too much, but I do think that it isn't just meh because of the story element and that elevating that portion of it. So I would say good tier, nothing that super significant, but it's really good on a story front. And then we have Aang versus Zuko, their first fight. No, this might be their second fight when they were on the Fire Nation vessel or on Zuko's ship. I think this one is pretty, I don't know if I want to say awesome. So here's the thing. I'm going to put these rankings and I might switch these at the end because when I see how they rank against other of my favorite fight scenes, I might switch them up. On site, I'm going to say awesome for this one. In particular, because I think the forms in this particular fight scene were really good. I think that Aang, and you can see a lot of like what he was trying to do. Now, I'm not a martial artist at all. I don't know anything about martial arts. The only thing I know about from martial arts is really from popular media. I did practice Taekwondo when I was from age 7 to 10. So that's the only one I have some kind of insight in. But again, that's when I was like, a youngster. I don't really know anything that well. But from what I could tell from this, from what I've seen from films and stuff like that, the choreography of the actual martial arts, I think, is really well done in this really short fight scene. Not that big of a fight scene at all, but I think it's really creative. It's all done in one really small confined room. And I like a lot of what Aang was doing, where he was kind of doing this touch defense, where he was always making sure he was at Zuko's back. I really like that element of it. So yeah, I'm putting it in awesome, but it might change depending on, how I like some of the other fights. And then we have Zuko versus Aang, their first proper fight. I'm going to put this in good for almost the same reason that I did for Aang versus Zhao, in that I think that it's good on a story element, but the fight itself is kind of like whatever to me. It's actually just kind of meh. But the fact that we get the first insight about Aang putting other people above himself, where he was okay with engaging in a fight with Zuko, but once it put the Southern Water Tribe members in danger, he was like, nah, I'm backing off. So again, story element, like that a lot, but the actual fight itself, I don't think there was a lot going on. It wasn't that great, but good. I'm gonna put that in good. It's a good fight scene. Next up, we have the Blue Spirit breakout from the Pohuai fortress. I'm going to also put that in good. It could maybe go awesome, and again, awesome might bring it up there because of the story element, but I don't think the fight scene itself is all that great. I think there's only one shot that I really recall that I like a lot, and it's when Zuko, as the Blue Spirit, was fighting off all of the soldiers and the prisoners in like that circle when he was in the middle of it. I thought that was a pretty good shot. And also I like the idea, I'm gonna put this in awesome because I like the ending of this fight because you see the Yuyan archers, and this is a cool thing too because a lot of times where you have the villains or like the minion characters, they're not that competent, but the archers, the Yuyan archers are they the Yuyan? I like them a lot because they were competent, not only in their fight with Aang versus just them, but then also in the Blue Spirit episode where they were escaping the prison. So for that reason, yeah, I'll put it in awesome because there are a few elements in there that I like a lot. I'm really, really down for some of the fighting that Zuko was doing as a Blue Spirit, and I really like the ending of it as well. I think it's a really dope fight. And then we have the prison break with Katara, Sokka, and Aang versus and the Earthbenders versus that stronghold, the Warden, and all of his guards. I'm gonna go with meh on this one. Again, it's cool for a story element that Katara was able to bring them up, but even that wasn't enough for me I don't think about this fight all that often, if I'm gonna be very honest. I think it's a very whatever fight. There's not like a lot going on that really sticks with me, but it's not a bad fight either. It's not bad at all. So I'm gonna just put it in a very neutral meh. And then we have the Fire Nation versus the Kyoshi Island, the Kyoshi Warriors, Aang. There's a lot of fights in there. I'm gonna put this in good, and it's really only for maybe 2 particular scenes in this fight scene. One being that we get to see Zuko's breakdancing fight stance again, which I like a lot. We saw that first in his first fight with Zhao, but I also liked it here in the Kyoshi Warrior stuff. I also like this fight scene because of Aang being able to use the Kyoshi fans and basically just blow Zuko really far back. So good for me. I think it's a very solid fight. It's definitely above the middle tier, but I don't think it's like particularly amazing or awesome. I think a lot of these fights in the first book are probably going to sit in this realm in the good and meh, because I don't think the fight scenes get really, really good until book 2, and then in particular book 3, where my favorite fight scenes are. Next up, we have the fight from the Great Divide between the 2 tribes. I actually, surprisingly, in rewatching this on the Fanalysis channel, again, a podcast that I'm on, I actually really enjoyed this fight more than I remember. And actually, it stuck with me to the point where I remember like some of the blade work that was going on between the 2 main tribes heads, the chiefs of the 2 tribes were going at it. And I thought there was some really cool blade work in there. So just for that reason alone, something that I thought would have been meh actually is pretty good. And it stuck with me just purely on the choreography aspect of it. I don't really care much for the story of the Great Divide. I don't hate it like most people do. Like, I don't like say it's like the worst thing ever, but I do think it's very forgettable. But this fight for me is not. So next up, we have Iroh and Zuko versus the Earthbenders when Iroh was captured by the Earthbenders during the Spirit World episode at the beginning of the episode when he was in the hot springs and then he got taken away. This is actually pretty cool. This is our first time seeing Iroh fight properly, and he doesn't do a lot of firebending. Like, he's very ingenious in how he used his fire breath to, like, you know, make the chains hot to get the Earthbenders to get away from him, and then he was able to get away, and then he was using a chain basically to break through rocks, which I never understood all the way yet. Like, I obviously it's cartoon, so it's not real world physics and it's not real world people that we're watching, but it's always in this weird space, Avatar, I mean, where people can do superhuman feats like taking a chain and busting earth with it, but in other times they seem like they're regular humans. But I'm gonna say that this fight is gonna be in the awesome realm. It's our first time seeing Iroh fight. I think the team up between him and Zuko is really dope. We got to see some pretty cool earthbending too, I think, in it as well, and it was fairly dynamic. I think it was a fairly dynamic fight, so yeah, awesome tier. Next up, we have another one. We have Iroh versus the Firebenders at the Northern Water Tribe, and this is particularly the one at the very end of the series, or the end of the first season, I should say, where he straight up told Zhao, like, you know, if you don't put down the moon spirit, I am going to come at you with full force. And he did, and it was, I think this one we can almost call legendary, or I will call legendary. It's not particularly interesting in its choreography. It's very short and to the point, but there is so much narrative weight behind it, and also because we've seen Iroh, you know, fight a few times, like I said, with the previous fight we just talked about, but we haven't seen him unleash like this, and to see him like take these people out really quickly. Granted, they're just Fire Nation soldiers and nothing particular. It's not like he was taking out a bunch of White Lotus members or anything like that. Still though, it gives me chills just seeing him like unleash on them. So I'm gonna go legendary, even though it probably, if I'm being really super objective with it, probably should just be awesome, but I'm gonna put it legendary just because of how much weight is behind that fight in particular. Next up, we have Jet versus Aang, and I'm gonna have to go with legendary, and in particular, and for the shot here, like, it's a very Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon kind of shot where you have them on the tree line and them coming out of the trees and jumping in and going out. And also, it's a really just cool fight in general. There's a lot of really nice martial arts that are going on, not only with Aang, which you've seen throughout the series, but also with Jet with his 2 hook swords, which I think are really awesome, and the way he uses them I think are really cool, and the fact that he's standing up to Aang and they're doing this fight all throughout the trees. We haven't really seen too many fights like this that are this dynamic and this like overarching, except for maybe, you know, of course, the big fight at the very end of the series. But this one I definitely will put in legendary. Is probably at the end of this, I kind of want to do a list of all the books together as a proper like top 10, you know, my favorite fight scenes or whatever. This one most likely will be in that top 10. Next up, we have the first fight with Jet, so Jet versus the Fire Nation. So really, Jet and his band of misfits are basically the fight here. I think this one's pretty good. I there were some really cool moves, like in particular, I think Jet's first move when he hooks the soldiers by the ankles and pulls them overhead, I think is really, really dope. That one sticks with me a lot. But in terms of the rest of it, I think it is pretty basic in its choreography. And narrative-wise, it's not something that's super grandiose. Like Jet's not this huge character. He doesn't go on to be this huge character. The moment isn't all that huge. It's kind of like a standard, oh, there's a new, faction that's in the show. So I think this one's a solid, good, and the reason why it's above meh to me is because of that particular move with Jet getting them by the ankles. Next up is King Bumi versus Aang, and this one might be surprising where I'm going to rank this one, but I'm going to say it was a pretty meh fight. Granted, it's awesome because we get to see Bumi fighting outside the box and teaching Aang a lesson, but I think the actual choreography of the fight scene itself is very basic, even though I understand like narratively what it's trying to tell me, and that you got to be more creative as a bender, and that Bumi is the mastermind, the mad genius of all this. It's not a fight that I particularly enjoy all that much. There is one shot I think that I like a lot where Aang is kind of coming full force and they have like the speed lines going with them, and then that was cool. But really, honestly, I think this is just kind of a meh fight, and even the narrative part of it, which is kind of elevated some of these other fights, I don't think gets that high for me, because it's just not an interesting fight for me. And I think it might be because for me, earthbending, at least in the original series with Airbender, I think earthbending isn't the most interesting visual bending art as opposed to some of the other ones. Like I think I like firebending probably the best visually, then maybe waterbending after that one, then airbending, maybe water air kind of like tied, but earthbending has always been at the bottom for me, and that's just a personal taste thing for me. But yeah, I don't really come back to this and look all that much. So the next fight we have is Koizilla versus the Fire Nation. Now this one obviously probably should be in Legendary, but again, similar to the whole Bumi and Aang situation, I think the choreography of it isn't all that amazing to me, so I'm gonna drop it down to awesome. Still think it's an awesome fight. It has a huge drive behind it. We see, especially with Aang at the start of the fight, going into the spirit water, meditating and getting sucked in, and then coming back out as like this huge kaiju like monster thing going on. Is pretty awesome. But because of the choreography not being all that dynamic, I mean, granted, that's kind of the point of it. It's just like this big monster that's just like swoosh, swoosh, wave, you're dead. It's epic for sure, but it's just not something that I revisit. Like I don't go to YouTube and like go, oh, I gotta watch that fight again. It's not something I look to all that often. So I'm gonna go awesome for that one, not Legendary. I think the main thing for Legendary for me is that either has a huge impact on me when I watch it over and over, or it's something that I want to watch on YouTube. Like that's the criteria, right? Is like, do I want to rewatch that over and over on YouTube, or do I just kind of go like, oh yeah, it's cool in the moment, and then like it's nothing of it. That's kind of like the criteria. All right, next up we have Pakku versus the Fire Nation while he was within full moon. Now I think this is an extremely underrated fight. People don't really talk about it enough. I'm gonna put this one in awesome for sure. Seeing even the little bits that you see from Pakku is pretty impressive. The things that he's doing, not just the big wave and the water wave that he's doing, but some of the intricacies of the fight itself, I think are a little bit undervalued within the fandom of Avatar. But going back and watching this fight scene in particular, I was like, there is some really cool. Pakku is kind of a badass. Like you don't really hear that too much because you only get this one fight scene from him. You get him when he's fighting Katara, but this little snippet, pretty awesome. Keeping it in the awesome tier. And speaking of Pakku versus Katara, I think that one is also an awesome fight, almost Legendary. I would say Legendary, it would get there for me if the choreography was a little bit better. Like I think the choreography is pretty good though. Like now that I'm really thinking about it, I think the choreography is pretty stellar, and I think the things that like it's our first time seeing a proper waterbending fight, like to like a master using it. And granted, Katara wasn't a master at this point, but she was a pretty talented bender. I'm gonna put this Legendary actually. Like I thought it would be awesome, but I'm actually gonna put Legendary because yeah, this is a fight that I would go back to and revisit often, and it has a lot of interesting choreography behind it. Also has a very strong narrative drive behind it as well. So yeah, Legendary for sure. For this next one, we have Aang and the rest of the gang fighting against the Fire Nation at the Northern Air Temple. For this one, I'm gonna be honest, I don't really think about it all that often, and I'm gonna say that it's just kind of meh. It's kind of a meh fight for me. Like it's cool, like you have like the siege idea, you have like the idea of Sokka, like hey, let's use these airships, or like basically inventing airships for the first time to fight against the tanks for the Fire Nation. But really, again, The actual staging of the fight, I think, is not that interesting to me. There's not really any shots in my mind right now that are very like, that pop up in my head and go like, oh yeah, that fight has that awesome moment right there, or that awesome moment right there. It's really just kind of a middle of the road fight for me in terms of Avatar, just fights in general. So yeah, next up we have the pirates versus Aang and the gang, and basically all the Fire Nation, or Zuko and his Fire Nation squad. This one I want to say off the top of my head is meh, but I'm actually going to push it to good, because there are a few shots in this one that I remember that are cool in particular. Like there was one where Aang does a little cyclone and like tosses a pirate out the way. I think that's pretty cool. Obviously this scene here is really comedic and funny, where I think Sokka, I forget someone was trying to call Aang, and then like he spreads all of the smoke away, and then he sees a bunch of pirates and Fire Nation around him. He goes like, whoops, that's bad, and then brings it back. So I like that bit of it. It's really funny. It's got a lot going on. You have the three factions going on. You have the pirate captain, I think, was fighting Zuko at that point. You have Katara doing better with her water bending, so that there's a nice story drive to it as well. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it at good. Don't think it's an awesome fight. I think it's above meh because of the reasons I stated. So good. Let's leave it at good. And the next fight we have here is Zuko versus Aang, which is also kind of a bigger fight, because also you have a little bit of Appa versus the Shirisu. I forget what the name of those things are. The ones with the weird little nose thingy that can smell everybody. I think they're called Shirisu or something like that. I'm sure I'm saying that incorrectly. But this fight definitely goes to legendary. It's one of those fights that I think about all the time, especially the fight when it's staged on the well. The first time it's on the well, not the last time, where it's just Aang evading Zuko, and it's just a bunch of like short distance like fighting that's going on. And then of course it ends with like this big huge splash of water with Aang using the well to push up Zuko. So yeah, that definitely an amazing fight. Has some pretty cool camera angles too. Also you get the fight with Appa, and June is involved in it too. Yeah, one of the better fights I think in book one, if not possibly, I don't know if it's my favorite fight, but it's in contention of being like top 5 fights for me in terms of the book one fights. Next up we have the Yuyan archers versus Aang. I think this one's really awesome. Don't think it's quite legendary. It's almost hitting legendary. I don't know why it doesn't hit legendary. Like I can't think of a real reason why it doesn't get to that tier for me, but it's definitely an awesome one. I also think it's another one of those similar to the Pakku versus Fire Nation squad in the Northern Water Tribe with the full moon, as that's very undervalued. I don't think a lot of people talk about it, but it's actually a really cool fight. It's also a fight that Aang basically loses, and it's really cool, again, like I was saying before, that it's cool seeing kind of like the minion characters doing well. Very similar to the Kyoshi fight. The Kyoshi fight versus Fire Nation, you can see people in the background, like them actually being competent in the way that they're fighting, even though they're not a main character. Usually the main characters are only the ones who are allowed to be competent in these kinds of stories, but it's like, no, everybody can be competent, you know what I mean? So next up we have Zuko and Katara at the Northern Water Tribe, which of course is going to be legendary. It's one of the best fights in the entire book, if not the series. It's going to be up there for me when all of this is said and done. Great dynamic fight. We also see the progression of Katara, how she's gone from the beginning of the book being pretty much a novice to being almost, I mean, I wouldn't say she's a master yet at the end of book one, but she's on her way to being quite proficient. And also the idea of like, the sun versus the moon, Katara having the upper hand when the moon was at her back, but then Zuko having the upper hand when he had the sun at his back when it rose. It's just a really cool balance of the two elements that was going on. And also just the idea that they were fighting over Aang, so like there was an objective to the fight besides just like, I gotta beat this person. It's more like, I gotta beat this person and also take Aang away and have him in my possession. So I think that was a really dope fight. Really cool, legendary, easily, for sure. All right, so next up we have the very first fight that Sokka has ever been a part of, Sokka versus Zuko, which tends to be I think it's a trend with Sokka and Zuko, because I don't think Sokka has ever beaten Zuko, even going as far as the comics, where we see that, they had a little sword fight and Sokka lost that. This is of course more playing as a comedy, but I don't think about it all that often, if I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna say that this one is probably going to be one of those meh fights, because I don't really care for it, but I also don't think it's bad. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a quick stab, and then Zuko blocking it, and then that's it, it's over. So not bad. Like I don't think anything about it was particularly just bad. It's a meh. I think this is like kind of like the case for Avatar in general, that a lot of its episodes, its character dynamics, fight scenes, none of them are really bad or trash. They're just kind of just they're mad to legendary, and that's kind of like, you know, Avatar in a nutshell. So next up we have Zuko versus Zhao round 2 at the Northern Water Tribe. I don't really think about this one all that much, but I do remember it being a really, you know, fairly well choreographed fight scene, so I'm going to put this in good. Of course, it wasn't really a case of who would win, more so that it was a foregone conclusion that I think that Zuko was going to win that fight, so there wasn't really a lot of stakes at play. I mean, the coolest thing about the fight probably is that Zhao got taken to the spirit world, like, you know, Koizilla takes him at the end and like pulls him under, and of course we realized later on with Legend of Korra that he was in the Valley of Lost Souls and all that kind of stuff, or Valley of the Lost, forget what it was called. But yeah, this fight I think is good. It's above mad because I remember it being a well choreographed fight and there was some cool shots in it, but I can't say that it's something that I like think about too often, so it's not really awesome or legendary for me. But one that I do think that is legendary, and it's our first proper fight between firebenders. It's our first Agni Kai of the entire series, and that's going to be Zhao versus Zuko in the very, not the first episode, I think it was the third episode that this was at. Definitely a legendary fight. It has some of the best shots. I still remember to this day, like I can see it in my mind right now. And then also you have Iroh in the background, like explaining to Zuko what he has to do to win a fight, you know, like break his root, like all of that stuff. I think is a really good story element, really great choreography, great fight in and of itself. Also a good development for Zuko, also setting up, you know, that Zhao is kind of like the bad guy for not only, you know, Aang and the gang, but also for Zuko going forward. I think it does a lot, and also I could tell that they put a lot of effort into this one, because yeah, it's the third episode. You have to kind of like show your stuff, and I think they did a really good job of setting the tone of like how awesome these fight scenes will be, and how intricate they're going to be at times, and fluid, and just fun to watch. So yeah, legendary for sure. And then the last one we have up is Zuko fighting against the Firebenders. This is the very first fight scene we've seen with any kind of firebending in it. I'm gonna say this one's kind of like a meh. It could be good. Like I don't think there's anything bad with it, but again, I don't really think about it all that often. Kind of sucks to make this one the last one because it's kind of like a merpa-derp like at the end. Maybe I should do the Zhao and the Zuko fight last, because that's a big more of like a hoorah of like fight scenes. But yeah, I think it's cool. I mean, there were some cool movements in this one in particular. Like I think there was one moment where Zuko was like kind of going overhead. There's like a fire whip situation that was going on, like a spiraling fire plume that I think was really cool. But yeah, I think, you know, generally just meh. Like I don't think about it all that often. And also, it's not supposed to be like that crazy of a fight. It's supposed to be just like, oh, this is a prince training, and he's obviously like, you know, very determined to get the Avatar back. But that's it. That is my ranking for the book 1 fights of Avatar: The Last Airbender, Water. And as you guys can see, I don't have any of them in bad or trash, and that's true. Like I think most, like I was saying before, I don't think anything in Avatar: The Last Airbender really is ever bad or trash. These fights in particular all have some sort of meaning behind them. They have some sort of, if there's not like meaning, they're at least very cool to watch. But they're all very solid. Like they're all mad to legendary, I would think. But I want to hear from you guys. What do you guys think about my list? What would your list be? Let me know in the comments below, or you can watch more of my videos here on the side of my face, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace, love, and remember, be water, my friends.